Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for being here today, in person or connected from anywhere in the world via Zoom. And so, again, I'm going to let you know that the event will be recorded and will be available for our PhD students. Since this conference is to be considered not only as the Refugee and Reconciliation book launch, but also as the first session of the 2022 Ober Seminar for Religion, Conflict and Reconciliation PhD program here at the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies. First of all, I would like to say a big thank you to each and every one of you at JCRS, to my fellow co-editors, Zina Barakat, who's online, Professor Martin Leiner, and Yad Al-Dajani, who's here in the room, and to all those who contributed to the book with their papers or through their talks during the conference, and to all those with whom I had the chance to exchange emails and different relationships in these almost 3 years of work. And special thanks go to my fellow JCRS members, especially to my friend and colleague, Francesco Ferrari, who will be chairing the session together with me today, with whom I have the honor to coordinate the RCR Doctoral School at JCRS. And of course, to all of our PhD candidates who are here in the room and with whom I have always the chance to learn something, especially the ones who helped today for the setting up of this event. Gunesh Dasli, Mika and Marisa Matix, who's now in Morocco, lucky her, but has been very active in the center, very active figure in the center in the last few months. And then what to say? We made it. Alhamdulillah, we made it. It's been a long work and sometimes through troubled waters. In fact, this book is based on, it would not be accurate to say that the book is just the proceedings of a conference. But the first MENA conference, we have the chance to talk about it, and my colleague Yad Al-Dajani will talk about it later more in detail. But it is definitely based on that conference that took place in Jena in August 2018. So before the pandemic, before the war, it's been really going to troubled waters. So first of all, now I'm leaving the floor to my co-chair, Francesco Ferrari, who is going to present the man without whom no MENA, no book, no other projects, maybe not even the center will take place. So I leave the floor to Dr. Ferrari, and then he will explain, he will introduce our first speaker of the day. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Davide, and yes, welcome everybody. I'm very glad to see all of you today for this event. Our first speaker does not need any presentation, actually. It's Professor Martin Leiner, so the founder and the leader of the JCRS. I'm very glad to give him the word. So Martin Leiner is also editor in the book on reconciliation and refugees we are presenting today. And yes, I leave him immediately the stage.
Yeah, thank you very much, dear Francesco, and dear all, for being part of this
Martin,
event.
we cannot hear you.
I can hear him.
I have to... Can you hear me on the Zoom? Can you give me a sign? Also, it's only in the
meanwhile,
room.
that maybe Professor Leiner is... Yes, because I cannot hear him.
Taking part in this event. Thank you, Francesco, for the presentation, and Davide for the introduction. I will speak briefly in 3 functions and for 3 roles. One is to greet you in the name of the JCRS. The second will be that I want to talk a bit about the book and also about MENA very briefly, which is the fruit and the event which goes together with this book. So first of all, my greetings. I'm very happy to see you. You are from the doctoral program or you were invited and have joined. Thank you for taking your time. And thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure also to see you, partly again after several times we could not meet. Thank you so much to be here. Some special greetings also. Natalie Manko, with congratulations. She received a DAD stipend, no, a stipend from the Catholic Academic Exchange Service. And she will be able also to join and to come to Jena to the doctoral school, which is also a great news we had. Then also my greetings go to Vladislav, who is a refugee actually from Ukraine, and he is now in Sofia. Thank you for joining. You were as a guest researcher with us in Jena, and it's great that you are with us, and maybe there will be opportunities to invite you to come to Jena and to follow your academic work with us. Yeah, Benjamin also is from Kiev, but also from is living also in Tel Aviv and also in Gera, so he's a bit a trilateral man. And also special greetings to you. Then we have also, which is also a big joy for me, Raisa Barash, who is also editor of another volume of the RIPAR. And I don't know where you are, I assume in the UK now. Anyhow, you are also somehow a refugee, I assume now.
It's a little bit true.
If you want to speak, just, yeah, please.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much that I have ability to take part in your scientific meeting, because it's very hard to talk, because I'm here in Moscow and it's very difficult to talk about all the situation and its tragedy, and I have no words, and it's very difficult to talk about this crime that the Russia's authority do. And all my heart is with the innocent people in Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
Героям слава.
I mean, just God bless all you, and you will win. And I have no even words, and thank you to be together with you. Sorry, me, it's very difficult to talk. So.
Yeah, but thank you very much for saying these good words. And we had also some conversations before, and you know, we have had a conference together. You were MENA editor of one volume of the RIPAR, and you are also one of us. And this will not change, and you can always count on us if we can help you or do something.
Alas, it was not enough to be important here in Russia, that in our book we told about the conflicts that could divide the society, but unfortunately it was just an attempt that was deemed important for persons who have some ability to make political decision. Our conference, I mean, our summer school was in 2014, just after annexation of Crimea, and nobody could believe that all that could be done. And we, in our book, told about the Soviet past that is still used by Russian authority in order to make something like official ideology in Russia, and nobody could hear about this one. And person in Russia still, many people in Russia still could not believe that the Soviet past still matter, and it's still the reason for our authority to make anything and to make something like official ideology that is based on very uncritically depicted Soviet past. And unfortunately, we couldn't do the important thing that we wanted to do. But thank you very much that you do remember our participation. And I believe, I don't know what to say. Still, it's so deep.
Raisa, I wanted to say something to you, if you can hear me, because it's very, very important in those times, because also I thought about, because my mother and I came from Kiev, and I lived there for 18 years. But in the last week, I was publishing the Russian people who fight it for freedom. So I posted the Anna Politkovskaya and Valeria Novodvorskaya and Boris Nemtsov and other people, in order that you'll understand that the today's situation, it's a situation of government. It's a situation of maybe crime rule or maybe some kind of crime regime, but it's not should show us something toward people that live, that Russian people, or people that were murdered. And today, as Navalny is sitting for crime of the system, and we know all those people who sit in prisons, so they were imprisoned, and people who go into protest. And I know how hard it's to go to protest. I know how hard. I saw the picture that people protesting in Moscow, professors, they were arrested. They were made them very high expense of terror. And I know the history of the past. I know the history of the Stalin's terror, and people were afraid. And today people also afraid. They're afraid in Russia, afraid to talk. They're afraid, they're afraid to say something, because they know that someone not just can say something, but to come to their house, to find them, to beat them, to kick them, to fight them from their work. So I know, and I think it's very, very clear, so we understand, and I understand, that there is wonderful people who fight toward freedom, toward democracy. And sometimes they pay very, very, very high price, And so it's wonderful hear your words, and wonderful to know. And I'm pretty sure that there is amount of people. There's also the channels as Dorst, the activist of this RAIN channel, that acting every day and securing their life. It's just to say the words. It's just to take for ourselves some kind of responsibility and some kind of very, very, very hard situation. I thank you very much. I think we shouldn't make the answer for all these crimes to people. There is some regime, there is the evilness, and there is the people that support it, but not all of them. Many of them are fighting, and I hope for you that the peace and freedom will come to your place, that one day it will come to Moscow. One day things like Maidan will come to Moscow, and the people who now are doing crimes, they will be punished, but punished by law, not punished by mob, not punished as they done. And also it will go to the Soviet past. I think the wonderful activist of Valeria Ilyishna Novodvorskaya, she told about what we should do about the Soviet past and how we can describe it as it not happened in Russia. It's not happened what happened in Nazi Germany after Second World II, about the crimes, and it doesn't happen. So because of that, we still seeing those parts of last Soviet and oppression. Thank you. I'm very appreciated, and I think that it's very important also to people not to bring this hateness toward nations, toward people, because we go into the same direction. It's the same direction of fascism, because fascism, it means that we hate people, and we shouldn't hate people. We shouldn't hate some crime regimes or crime organizations, but not the people and not the folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benjamin. Thank you for your words, but I just want to say the only thing. I want to say that we here in Russia will unfortunately unsuccessful to stop it and to prevent it. And I want to say that, of course, we are, of course, guilty of all that have been done, because even taking part in the protest movement from the 20 or wherever, just after, I don't want to name this person, just after the new president Srok started, it was just a game. It was not a real protest, and we were unsuccessful. And I want to tell people that we are so sorry. And I want to ask to be not very strict for us, but we wanted to change our society, but of course we were not successful. And it's very difficult to understand that people, innocent people in Ukraine, were killing in the name of Russian citizens. It's so hard, and please sorry us. We were unsuccessful. Sorry.
Thank you for your words.
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all this. And we are often trying things and are not successful. It is like this in life. And yeah, we move on now with our program, but we stay connected in our hearts and maybe continue conversation about this. So my welcome part is finished now. All the others are welcome, of course, as well, but not I mentioned them especially. So the next thing is about the book. So the book will be presented. I show it to you. I have it here with me. I'm in Prague now. I'm teaching at the Charles University in German Czech reconciliation class. And in this book, we were presenting refugees and reconciliation. I think for the first time together in a book. Often there are good books on refugees or books on reconciliation, but not refugees and reconciliation. This is something new, and we think that this has an impact that we can think about several issues which are often expressed by refugees, but often not addressed by hosting societies, politicians, social approaches, and researchers. This is the fact that refugees are in need of reconciliation. Refugees often feel this need, for example, in the relationship to themselves. They feel guilty of having left people alone behind them. Some expressed it also on television from Ukraine, or Syrian refugees we had with us also said, I'm so sad that I left my old parents in Syria, for example, or that I left my country. So there's a feeling of guilt and uncomfort on this. Then they have also often traumata and often made things they have to integrate into their personality they maybe did not think about before. Paying a mafia organization to get a ship, for example. This was not people normally do and think they should do it, for example, but they did it when fleeing from different countries in the Middle East and North Africa, because this was at this time the main issue, the refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. But there's also another need for reconciliation, for example, with the hosting society, which is often hostile and not hospitable, and does not understand what a huge chance it is for them to encounter refugees, to learn from them, to live with them, to share with them, to be hospitable. Or between different groups of refugees who might stay on different sides in a civil war or in a war. Or a fourth form could be that there is also needed reconciliation, maybe with family members who suffered during the trip. People lost their sense in life. They might not agree with the country they arrived. They lost all the activities they did. Their whole life was not anymore there. And if refugees come back, we can also not follow the approach of some countries who just send them back and are happy to send them back. But they must come back in a changed environment, and there must also be reconciliation organized with the people who stayed there, and that it becomes not again a source of a lot of violence, as, for example, that people are attacking the refugees coming back because in the houses in the neighborhood now is living in different population and they don't like them to be there. So those different needs of reconciliation refugees have, it is a purpose of this book to make them understand and to show some examples and some studies and to go deeper into what is needed, like empathic dialogue in the work of Sena Barakat and Ralf Wüstenberg, or that what is needed and how the feelings could be of refugees in respect of home, feeling at home, in the work of Francesco Ferrari, who wrote this article. And in many others, there were such elements inside. So this is a book, and I hope you find interest and people who will read it. And now is a big chance with the refugees from Ukraine to understand these needs for reconciliation and to address them. They have been welcomed relatively with an open heart in many European countries and with a lot of hospitality. But it's important that this remains. This is always a big issue, whether this will be kept on this level and not again some backslash from people who are against migration and refugees can happen. And if people can learn maybe to make it better, this is a bit the purpose with the refugees, to understand them, to have interest for them, to listen to them and to their needs. And then the third thing I would like to present, or Vladislav, you raised your hand, maybe you would just say something.
Actually, thank you, Professor Leiner, for giving me awards, and this correlates highly to my experience for sure. And as I told to your colleagues that I had 1.5 hours and 2 backpacks to gather all of my life with these 2 backpacks, getting my 4-year-old daughter and going to the middle of nowhere. But the thing is, I want to thank European nation, being European nation, and hosting us in here and helping us with everything. Because you know, when I spent 52 hours in the bus going to nowhere, actually, with 4 years old kid, you know this feeling. I don't want you to feel the same, but I was frustrated, and now actually I'm speaking with you from the office. So some Bulgarian guy I didn't know rented out his office, moved out his office furniture, and I will show you double bed. You can see into the bed, and the sofa for my daughter to sleep. So it's the first thing of solidarity. And actually, I'm going to the protest against Russian influence here, bringing toys to Russian Cultural Center. And I've never seen that solidarity. And even Bulgarians in here who spent all their lives in protests, our colleagues from scientific field, from communicational team, anti-crisis field, they say, we are living here for all of our life, and we've never seen this. We've never seen this. So I would like to thank you for an idea of hosting me, and I would like to thank Europeans for being that on the same page of dialogue. So this was what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I come to my third point. This book was also a fruit of a conference, and this conference was the founding of the Academic Alliance for Reconciliation Studies in the Middle East and North Africa. So we got funding for a conference, especially for colleagues and partners from universities in countries such as Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, where also a lot of refugees are staying now, Egypt as well. But also there were people from, colleagues from Morocco there, and people talking about Libya and Iraq and other countries in this region. And this is, for me, it was like a miracle that it happened that so many people came from those universities and were interested in academic work on reconciliation, and that it stayed, because we have now this academic alliance planning its third conference in this August. And we are very lucky that we have also a coordinator. It's Dr. Tacchini, who already wrote a proposal for this conference, and we had in 2018. And with all these corporations, we hope to make an impact also in this region. Thank you also to the other editors, Davide and Jena, who made a huge work for the book to be so good, to read, proofread, to give answers to the different articles, to select the articles which are now published. Thank you all. And Davide had a lot of work to do in the end, also with the editor. I really was very admirative that he brought it through. And yeah, thank you very much. I pass on now to Francesco again to give the word to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. And thanks also to everyone who took the word in this first very also emotional talk. I think it showed also how reconciliation studies is not something that you can do fully detached from yourself. You bring your entire person within. So, and also how reconciliation researchers and activists are beyond borders and beyond groups, and actually it's about being for reconciliation beyond the nation states that are against each other. So thank you very much to all those who entered the first talk in our conference. Now I'm glad to give the word to my colleague, Dr. Davide Tacchini, with whom I share the coordination of a doctoral program, Religion, Conflict, Reconciliation in Jena. He is a research fellow at JCRS and also adjunct professor of Arabic language and literature at the University of Parma in Italy. His current research interests include reconciliation and migration, religion and reconciliation, reconciliation in the Quran and in the Muslim tradition. He lectures widely on both sides of the Atlantic and in the Arab world. Among his recent publications, other than the book we are presenting today, we can mention Islam and Democracy, written with the Honorable Amédée Turner, Migration and Reconciliation in the 21st Century, and which has appeared in the Annali di Scienze Religiose and in the Yearbook of Muslims in Europe. So thank you so much, Davide, for being with us, also for the organization of the present event.
I think I have to try to mute. Okay. And it looks like my voice comes. Thanks again. Please allow me to share the screen.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Now I should be able to share the screen. All right, I think you can see my screen now. All right, okay. Okay, yeah, thank you. So I'm trying to give an overview, a quick overview on the situation of human mobility, international migration, and forced migration. And then I end up talking about the book briefly, because Professor Leiner already gave an overview of the book. Why is human mobility so topical? I would like you to focus on the definition that, even if this is not legal, the UN provides this definition. Any person who changes his or her country of usual residence. So Francesco and I changed our country of residence, and many of our PhD students did. Personally, I changed 3 times my country of residence. You can.
Nobody's a German.
Nobody's German. That's interesting. That's interesting. You see how human mobility is impacting society, is reshaping the world as never before. So it's really something we should talk about. It's really a reshaping of the world and impacting society. And if we narrow our focus a little bit on international migration, I would like you to focus again on the lower part of the slide, that there is as much migration between less developed countries as there is from less developed countries to more developed ones. And then, of course, the growing phenomenon. But just focus on this one. We'll be back on this later in the presentation. And if we, okay, if we narrow again on forced migration, I would like also to focus again on the second sentence from the bottom. As of 2017, over 83% of refugees and asylum seekers lived in the South. And then on the last line, these stats do not include the so-called IDPs, the internally displaced persons, which reached 41.8 million in 2018. These stats are from either 2017 or 2018, and they are taken from UN data. If not specified, this is the source. Talking about IDPs, they are 100% forced migrants. In fact, if you see point number 1, the movement is coerced or involuntary. So they are not international migrants, international forced migrants, but they are 100% forced migrants. And then look at the size of forced migration in the world, 70 million people. of which 41.8 IDPs and then refugees and asylum seekers. The 25.9 million refugees includes also the 5.5 million Palestinians under the administration of the United Nations Relief and Movement Agency, Palestine refugees in the Near East. The size of the movement here, of the whole picture of forced migration should push us, but only us, also the decision makers, to think about it much more in depth than they're doing now. And the number is growing, okay? In fact, if we go through, okay, why is the MENA region so important? And now we're going to put stats there. 90% of refugees do not choose Europe. This is the opposite of what mainstream media show us on a daily basis. 90% of the refugees in the top 10 countries in the world do not choose Europe as their destination, either because they can't or because they choose not to do so. And here we are going to give a look to the Middle East and Europe again. These are the top 10 refugee hosting countries in the world. You see Jordan and Lebanon that are clearly Middle East. Turkey is not technically the Middle East, but not even Europe. And we know why the 3.7 million are there. And the only country in Europe that is among the top 10 is Germany, that basically welcomed 1 million Syrian refugees during the crisis. And I would like to let you know, Ethiopia, Sudan, and Bangladesh, and Uganda, right? How many refugees they are accepting here. Great, per 1,000 inhabitants. Lebanon, Jordan again, South Sudan again. And the only country, European country is Sweden. Actually, this is mainly due to the wave of Iranians and Afghani and Pakistani refugees that reached Northern Europe, let's say Scandinavian countries, in the last 15 to 20 years, but this wave slowed down a lot in the last 3 or 4 years. But there's a huge community, a lot of family reunifications. This is why this rate. The so-called refugee producing country, I hate this word, but they use it, Syria and Afghanistan. This is still quite updated. We have to add about 1 million Afghani that escaped with the disaster of last August. So it's about one more million. So you say that 67% of all refugees in the world come from just 5 countries. And I would like to highlight also, South Sudan is among the countries that send the third in the world actually, number of refugees, and was among the ones who were accepting more refugees in the world. So this gives the idea of the movement of forced migrants, not as a movement from less developed countries to more, but it's mainly a movement between or among the so-called global south. And so why a book on refugees now, and why reconciliation? I think I could skip this because Professor Leiner explained very clearly that maybe this is the first time that refugees and reconciliation were not only the same book, but also the same title. This is a key point that might be elaborated by my fellow speakers later. Reconciliation studies might be an invaluable source to approach effectively the issues of human mobility and especially forced migrations. Martin Leiner explained also, basically spoiled part of my speech today, but I'm happy because of this, because the idea of refugees and reconciliation, and that the figure and the experiences of refugees actually include or touch several features of reconciliation studies. Reconciliation with yourself, and not only because you feel guilty because you left part of your family home, but also because you have the idea of, for example, dealing with PTSD, the post-traumatic stress disorder, that frequently allows you or forces you to deal with your past, with your goals, what happened to you before migration, let's say human rights violations or any violence that happened to you or your community or your family. And then the very controversial relationship with your hosting society, that frequently you have all this experience in the past, and then you arrive there and you're not, warmly welcome, just to say, so to speak. So this in this framework, reconciliation studies might play a prominent role. And part of it is how to define the identity and identify reconciliation in the real world, what we call the real world. This is exactly what I said. It is measurable that you have to deal with your past and to reconcile with your past. And so reconciliation studies may play a prominent role. In fact, yeah, a multifold relationship is exactly what I was talking about. When did this start? It started on August 14, 2018, here in Jena, during the first MENA conference. Professor Leiner mentioned it, and then Dr. Odojani will explain it more in detail because he's currently running the project that started very slow, very small. Nothing starts big, but disasters. This is an Arabic proverb. So it started small, not too small, but as a kickoff conference, and now it is a project that is involving more and more universities and institutions every year. Okay, this is a picture taken at the castle there with the whole MENA group at the time. You can see some faces there. In fact, the idea of the book was born as the chance to publish the proceedings of this conference. And although all the papers presented at the gathering are included, the volume is meant to be much more than just a collection of papers. The subject, reconciliation refugees, is topical, and in many cases it still needs to be scholarly research in the area. And recent international forced migrations from deeply developed countries, we mentioned them before, especially sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa, and so on. It's a phenomenon that is in continuous evolution. That's what we have just talked about before. And at the time, it was only 20 universities from Jordan, Turkey, Morocco, Lebanon, Palestine, and Egypt, but Austria, Germany, the United Kingdom also, that joined the conference there. That was sponsored by the AAD and the FG. So it was a great work that they did. So the book has two sections. In the first one, the first one includes Professor Martin Leiner's paper that introduces the relationships between reconciliation and refugee studies. Then your servant here reflects on Christian-Muslim relations and reconciliation. And Professor Fanny Dutoit, who will be our keynote speaker today. At the time, he was analyzing the possible applications of reconciliation studies in Iraq at the end of the Islamic State. And since reconciliation studies include the chance of several multidisciplinary methodologies to conflict analysis, to analyze conflicts. The first section will find André Zempelburg, who's a former fellow of JCRS, who's approaching religious studies and migration in the Bible and the Quran, and our friend Francesco Ferrari about Jena and his experience between quest for Heimat and alienation after being imprisoned in Auschwitz. Dalal Irikat, who was probably attending the conference online, from the Arabic-American University of Palestine, she went deep into the Israel-Palestine conflict through diplomacy in the perspective of peace building, and Zina Barakat was among the editors and will be delivering a lecture today together with Ralph Wustenberg. They led the reader through an exploration of the political and religious dimensions of empathy. There are many papers in this first one. Carolina Rehrman, an interesting article on refugee issues in Germany and Greece. And the second session was more, and also Witzke de Jong, of course, Witzke de Jong, with her The European Story After the 2015 Refugee Crisis, and Amjad Abdulaziz also. The second session was more about practical issues and more, let's say, not practical issues, technically speaking, but just field work and field research, and included included Michael Berdine's personal experience of reconciliation in post 9/11 Arizona, and papers on transitional justice in Morocco, Rabah Aino and Amina Hakou, the Université Mohammed Premier in Oujda in Morocco, and contribution on digital news and new technologies applied to refugees in the West, such the one by Dr. Zaha Awad, who will be speaking today, and Ali Al-Fori, and of course, our friend Iyad Al-Dajani. Ayman Youssef analyzed the possibilities of reconciliation and peace building in Palestine, and Mu'attaz Zubi of the University of Jordan explained in detail the current situation of the welcoming of refugees in Jordan. And the book ends with an illuminating paper on the possibilities of transition in Libya after several years of empire. So this is Landi. I'm going to conclude with, let's say, one book, two sections, one message. That is, the reconciliation is based on widespread human capacities, empathy with the suffering of others, enthusiasm to build a better future, interest to cooperate, curiosity, feelings of interconnectedness. As we sadly see today, almost every day, some alternatives to this we're experiencing now may be devastating and destroying. The hope that reconciliation becomes a major theme for dealing with refugees seems quite realistic. And this hope is shared by the people of the MENA region and Europe. Thank you very much. Now I change my jacket and I become a chair, and I'm going to introduce, we cannot switch our jackets because you would not fit in my jacket, actually, but my jacket, your jacket will be much larger for me. Introduce here, who used to be the chair, Dr. Francesco Ferrari, who holds a PhD degree from the University of Jena, with a dissertation on Martin Buber's early philosophy. He coordinates the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies and is a postdoc research at the chair for Jewish philosophy of religion and intellectual history at the Goethe University in Frankfurt, and is currently writing on the concept of reconciliation after Auschwitz, with a focus on philosophers such as Jan Kehelevich, Adorno, Levinas, Ameri, Hannah Arendt, and others. He published 3 monographies on Buber, many papers on 20th century Jewish philosophy in English, German, and Italian, and translated several philosophical texts in Italian. But today, he's going to share with us some hot passages from one of the most classical texts on the topic of today. I leave the floor to Francesco.
Thank you so much, Davide. I'm setting the multimedia.
What about your mic?
Yes, I'm checking.
Okay.
If it's working. Yes, yes, great. I was checking my mic. Thank you very much, Davide, for the presentation, and thanks everybody for attending this meeting. So, as Davide said, I'm going to read you first some passages from a key text on refugees. And this text starts with the following sentence. We, in the first place, we don't like to be called refugees. We ourselves call each other newcomers or immigrants. Our newspapers are papers for Americans of German language. And as far as I know, there is not and never was any club founded by Hitler-persecuted people whose name indicated that its members were refugees. A refugee used to be a person driven to seek refuge because of some act committed or some political opinion held. Well, it is true that we have had to seek refuge, but we committed no acts, and most of us never dreamed of having any radical opinion. With us, the meaning of the term refugee has changed. Now, refugees are those of us who have been so unfortunate to arrive in a new country without means and have to be helped by refugee committees. Before this war broke out, we were even more sensitive about being called refugees. We did our best to prove to other people that we were just ordinary immigrants. we declared that we had departed of our own free will to countries of our choice, and we denied that our situation had anything to do with the so-called Jewish problems. Yes, we were immigrants or newcomers who had left our country because one fine day it no longer suited us to stay, or for purely economic reasons. We wanted to rebuild our lives. That was all. In order to rebuild one's life, one has to be strong and an optimist. So we are very optimistic. Our optimism indeed is admirable, even if we say so to ourselves. The story of our struggle has finally become known. We lost our home, which means the familiarity of daily life. We lost our occupation, which means the confidence that we are of some use in the world. We lost our language, which means the naturalness of reactions, the simplicity of gestures, the unaffected expression of feelings. We left our relatives in the Polish ghettos, and our best friends have been killed in concentration camps. And that means the rupture of our private lives. Nevertheless, as soon as we were saved, and most of us had to be saved several times, we started our new lives and tried to follow as closely as possible all the good advice our saviors passed on us. We were told to forget, and we forgot quicker than anybody ever could imagine. In a friendly way, we were reminded that the new country would become a new home. And after 4 weeks in France or 6 weeks in America, we pretended to be Frenchmen or Americans. The most optimistic among us would even add that their whole former life had been passed in a kind of unconscious exile, and only their new country now taught them what a home really looks like. It is true that we sometimes raise objections when we are told to forget about our former work, and our former ideals are usually hard to throw over if our social standard is at stake. In order to forget more efficiently, we rather avoid any allusion to concentration or internment camps we experienced in nearly all European countries. It might be interpreted as pessimism or lack of confidence in the new homeland. Besides, how often we have been told that nobody likes to listen to all that. Hell is no longer a religious belief or a fantasy, but something as real as houses and stones and trees. Apparently, nobody wants to know that contemporary history has created a new kind of human beings, the kind that are put in the concentration camps by their foes and internment camps by their friends. Even among ourselves, we don't speak about this past. Instead, we have found our own way of mastering an uncertain future. Since everybody plans and wishes and hopes, so do we. In spite of our outspoken optimism, we use all sorts of magical tricks to conjure up the spirits of the future. I don't know which memories and which thoughts nightly dwell in our dreams. I dare not ask for information, since I too had rather be an optimist. But sometimes I imagine that at least nightly we think of our dead, or we remember the poems we once loved. I could even understand how our friends in the West Coast during the curfew should have had such curious notions to believe that we are not only prospective citizens, but also present enemy aliens. It is the same story all over the world, repeated again and again. In Europe, the Nazis confiscated our property. In Brazil, we had to pay 30% of our wealth, like the most loyal member of the Bund der Auslandsdeutschen. In Paris, we could not leave our homes after 8 o'clock. But in Los Angeles, we were restricted because we are enemy aliens. Our identity is changed so frequently that nobody can find out who we actually are. So this was a text from the last century. It was a text from 1943 and actually from Hannah Arendt. And this is just called We Refugees. And I'm bringing here also to show how universal is this matter, beyond time, beyond space. It is something that goes beyond any particularism. It belongs to all of us. And this text is very interesting out of several reasons, and some of them have been already mentioned by my colleagues. So first, let me point you a sharp contrast, the one between self-defined identity, so we like to be called immigrants in this case, newcomers, terms related with free will, with choice, with agency, with being in control, from one side, and from the other side, the experience of ascribed identity. So somebody else is telling you who you are and the role you have to play. Terminologies like refugees here is perceived in the end as an imposition by others. Therefore, something that is crucial here for refugees is the acceptation or the refusal of an ascribed identity, and also the not availability of self-defined identity, which might lead to estrangement, alienation, because of the external locus of control, to speak with a social psychology. So with locus of control, I mean here the perception that one's own life is not in your own hands, but rather somebody else is in power on it. Therefore, also the lack of self-efficacy, the perception of having very few impact on the environment you are surrounded by. Therefore, also the issue of agency. So the feeling of having the capability to be impactful on the reality. And therefore, to overcome all of these feelings that are not just feelings, but have real consequences on the behavior and also on the ethical sphere, on the free choice, it occurs to feel one's current circumstances as the product of one's free will and choice. And obviously, the question is, how is it possible if you have the feeling that you are completely misplaced? So therefore, agency is a central category in the work of refugees of reconciliation with themselves and with the surrounding environment. And agency has to face what we can see also from Arendt's text, the experience of multiple experience of loss, loss of home, familiarity of daily life, loss of occupation, being of some use, loss of language and the related spontaneity, loss of relatives, which it means private legacies and loyalties. Loss, so that, as the author is saying, our lives as a rupture. And when we say rupture, the language shows the perception of one's life as splitted into a before and an after, a kind of a breach, so that loss is the experience where reconciliation processes with oneself and the environment are required. And loss is also the key word that describes in trauma studies the experience of PTSD, as my colleague was saying. Trauma is essentially loss, loss of control, loss of capabilities, loss of continuity between one's past and one's future, so that the possibility of having impact on the future seems to be not attainable. There is a gap between the previous life, the previous status, the caring people, and the current situation, which is something that seems to be the one where you are perceived as a refugee, as also my colleague was saying, many times as an undesirable person. And therefore, the issue of dealing with refugees and reconciliation is also the issue of coping strategies. And there are many coping strategies that also our text is showing, like the revisionism about one's previous life that seems to be recommended in a kind of therapeutical oblivion in order to fit better in the new country as a new home, if it is possible, which takes place also by having a new identity, silencing about the past with the out-group, which seems to have a lack of interest and a lack of empathy in the stories of refugees, but also in the in-group, in a kind of internal coaching, so to say. Identity is ascribed to refugees and changes according to who is in control. Refugees are perceived as prospective citizens from one side, but also as enemy aliens, as Arendt says. But it's also true that a wholly social constructed identity might lead to identity crisis and to the loss that we were talking about, even of identity. As she said, our identities change so frequently that nobody can find out who we actually are. All these elements considered, it becomes clear how refugees need reconciliation on many levels with their host countries, with their homelands, but first of all, with themselves. Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Francesco. That I think your paper fitted perfectly between a first more emotional part of the event and then a more data related one. So thank you again. Now it's our pleasure. I think I can still see your screen. Okay. Okay. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. That will be the last one of the first section. Then we have a small coffee break. That is Professor Zahra Mustafa Awad, who is Professor of Linguistics at the University of Jordan and has been a visiting scholar at several universities in Europe, the USA, and the Middle East. Her research focuses mainly on discourse analysis, language and media, cross-cultural communication, and foreign language teaching. Her publications include articles in international journals, chapters in edited volumes, and 2 textbooks. She is a member of the editorial board of the International Journal of Arabic English Studies and Voices in Asia journal. Dr. Awad has also been long involved in higher education management and accreditation at both the local and the regional levels. She is a recipient of several prizes, grants, fellowships, and scholarships. Please welcome Zahra Mustafa Awad.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much for this introduction. In fact, my presentation looks at the other side of the representation of refugees that Dr. Ferrari talked about. Dr. Ferrari talked about the identity of refugees and how they see themselves. I want to see, my paper looks at how they are seen by others, both by media and by host communities. So let me share my screen, if you allow me, just, yes. Okay. In fact, this paper was prepared by me and by Dr. Monica Kerner-Ludwig. She's a professor at University of Innsbruck, and I think she's here with us. Hello, Monica. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. So, like I said, can you see the? Yeah. Good. Wonderful. So, the representation of refugees has been very, both refugee, you can call them different names, like Dr. Ferrari said, don't call us refugees, we are immigrants. So refugees, asylum seekers, immigrants, and migrants. And I'm going to use the term or the acronym PRESM to refer to them. They have attracted the attention of many scholars and how they are presented in print press. Most studies on the issue has shown that their representation in print press is negative. The importance or the significance of their portrayal in print press comes from the contribution of such portrayal to creating and maintaining a moral panic in the host community and also among refugees themselves, as has been shown by several studies. For example, the distortion of Syrian refugees' image in Bulgarian media has contributed to extremist and populist discourse. I want to focus on the representation of refugees in European press, in particular in German and British press, and also in American press. So the issue of the image of refugees in the press has attracted a lot of attention, like I said, and it has been mostly negative. So, for example, in Hungarian newspapers, they are linked to crime and deviant behavior. In Finnish news articles, they are linked to illegality. In British news, the focus is on the need for removing failed asylum seekers. In Austrian newspapers, the focus was on refugees as presenting security threats and an economic burden. Except for Irish news portrayal of refugees, mostly the portrayal is negative. The Irish news showed them as victims. Also, this is true of Australian newspapers, which focus on preventing refugees from entering the country. On the other hand, in contrast, New Zealand newspapers introduced them in more humanitarian context. This humanitarian perspective of refugees is becoming more and more clear or in recent studies. Our study focused on Arab refugees in news discourse. This is because many Arabs from the Middle East and from MENA region, or from the North Africa, they have fled their countries because of the unrest, especially during the Arab Spring, and also during the wars in different countries, like the war on Iraq and the war on Syria, etc. As other refugees, Syrian refugees are associated also with illegality, and mostly they are discussed with relation to safety and to the welfare of the host communities rather than in a humanitarian context. Even like in Arab press, we have a mixture of both. I mean, as victims, and also they are portrayed as victims, and also as an economic burden. So like I mentioned before, the portraying refugees as threats to national security and the social cohesion has a very important effect on the attitudes towards them. So negative images of refugees promote their dehumanization, and this creates a hostile attitude towards them and provides justification for their exclusion. So, like I mentioned before, our study is concerned with Syrian refugees in Germany, and we want to see how their portrayal in media affected or affect the German public. In particular, we are interested in German university students. So basically, this is what we wanted to do in our study. So what we did, we have a questionnaire. We have built up a questionnaire to explore German university students' reading routines of news, and if they apply critical reading skills. And also, we wanted to explore their attitudes towards Syrian refugees. Then we compiled the news articles on Syrian refugees published during 2015 and 2016 in German, British, and American websites. After that, we analyzed the articles for expressions associated with with Syrian refugees using corpus linguistics and discourse analysis approaches. And then at the end, we compared the lexical items or the words featuring in, or the adjectives or whatever, let's say, adjectives or nouns that occur with Syrian refugees in digital news. We compare them with the ones that are used by our participants to express their attitudes towards them. So our participants were 268 students, mostly native speakers of German. They are enrolled in different programs in linguistics, and they come from different universities in Germany. The results of our questionnaire showed that our students read digital, most of them, they read digital news. And the most frequently visited websites were the Süddeutsche Zeitung, the Der Spiegel, die Zeit, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, Focus. These are the German websites. The English websites were the New York Times, the CNN, BBC, and the Guardian. It seems that our students or our participants, they apply critical thinking when they read news. The strategies they used were focusing on the source of news, the author's intentions, the specific examples, the occasions of the news report, the word choices, the addressed audience, and the identity of the author. So it seemed that they were not taking what is presented to them at the surface level, but they went deeper, tried to figure out who's describing or who's writing about these refugees, and what is his background, and what does he represent, which institutions he represents or she represents. Okay, right. So our results show that our participants were interested in news about refugees, and they wanted to learn more about Syria, and they believe that Syrian refugees are forced to leave their country. I mean, they did not just leave it because for economical reasons. No, it's just they were forced to leave their countries because of the war. the analysis of our questionnaire showed that the students thought that the terms associated with refugees in digital news were these, like including war, attack, flee, Muslim, home, education, etc. This is what they thought, occurs in the news. And the expressions they use to describe refugees include many terms, but including, desperate, different, educated, learn, language, etc. As for students' attitudes, our students' attitudes towards refugees, most of them were considering volunteering to support refugees, and they would believe in the positive contribution of Syrian refugees to the German society, and they reject the claim that the refugees have a negative effect on the quality of life in Germany. Now, this is the first part. The second part, we analyzed the articles that were dealing with the refugees. We have 3 data sets, one in German, the other comes from the British data, and the other one is American data. And in fact, we noticed that the number of articles which were published about refugees in 2015 were more than those in 2016, except for Focus and The Guardian. And this is understandable because the biggest waves were during 2015. In our data analysis, we used a computer program called Sketch Engine to analyze these huge data sets. I mean, they are comparatively small if we compare them to other corpora, but for our purpose, they were, I think, enough. The lexical, we looked at the words or the lexical items that occurred or collocate with the word refugee in English and Flüchtling in German. And we looked at, these are statistical values, the co-occurrence count, the mutual information, and the log dice. This is a sample of our data. And as you can see, we have the word refugee here and all the words that collocate with the word. I mean, it doesn't have to be immediate. It could be maybe 2 words to the left or to the right, or maybe 5. So depending on what the range we set. Okay. So what we did, we took those lexical items or these words, and we divided them into groups according to the themes that they reflect. And we identified 7 major themes. These are humanitarianism, integration, military conflict, political responsibility, dehumanization, financial burden, and security. These are the number of words and the co-occurrence count and the mutual information and log dice for the most significant German words and the most significant words that occurred in the British media and the most significant words that occurred in the American media. So, for example, I mean, I'm not going, because of the time constraint, I'm not going to go through all the words, but just to give you examples. So, for example, humanitarianism was reflected by words like aufnehmen, to accept in German, or helfen, to help, schützen, schutz, the protection, sorgen, to care for, etc. In British corpus, we have words like help, support, aid, humanitarian, world. In the American data or corpus, we have agency, world, help, aid, support. And we have some examples here. I could, read some examples. So, for example, here, the Prime Minister said Britain has a moral responsibility to help refugees. We have already provided sanctuary to more than can see 5,000, yeah, Syrian refugees in Britain. Right. For conflict, we have these words like crisis, flee, etc., migration. And we have here also examples. The Syrian refugees, these are from the digital news, from the websites, are fleeing violence, trauma, and horrific human rights abuse, are victims of terror, not terrorists. This comes from New York Times. Okay, dehumanization has to do with referring to refugees in numbers and water metaphors, like words millions, thousands, flood, wave, influx, etc. We have some examples here. How to ensure, or whatever here we have, totally overwhelmed. It is through these bottlenecks that refugees bore. So bore is used as a water metaphor to refer to refugees as being like water because there are so many, you know. As for I mentioned earlier, many studies showed that refugees are presented as an economic burden. So we also found this in our data. So we have words like funds, pay, funding, money, etc. In German, the German corpus, we have Geld, Einstellen, Kosten, etc. An example of that, we have, for example, the government has said it would use overseas aid funding to meet costs of 20,000 Syrian refugees. This comes from The Guardian. For political responsibility, we have words like accept, welcome, allow, etc. And examples of that, you know, we have here growing international and domestic demands that bring taken more refugees fleeing from Syrian civil war. Integration. I'm trying, because of the constraints of time, I cannot, you know, I try to keep to the time limit. We have words such as resettle, home, house, work, etc. And in the German corpus, we have aufnehmen, bleiben. Examples on that, like for example, in German, we have here Flüchtlinge aus Syrien dürfen in Deutschland bleiben. This is from Süddeutsche Zeitung. Refugees from Syria may stay in Germany. The theme of security, restrictions and segregation. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation that refugees are presented as a security threat. So we have words like risk, security, fear, threat, etc. We have some examples here. The White House Deputy National Security Advisor then said, we have very extensive screening procedures for all Syrians. Now, like I said at the beginning, our aim was to see if what is presented in the media is affecting students in terms of the words they use, whether the words the students or the participants use reflect similar themes. Now, first we looked at whether the students, what they see in the press, what images they see in the press first. So the words they used, like war, crisis, attack, flee, etc., this really reflects military conflict. And words they used, or they thought that they exist in the reports about refugees, are like Muslim and terror and dangerous, security and restrictions, and then home and education integration, and words they said they occur in the news: desperate, traumatized, poor, helpless. this reflects humanitarianism, and they use the word way for dehumanization. So out of the 7 themes we identified, 5 of these the students thought they occur in the articles. As the most important thing we want to see is how their attitudes towards our participants' attitudes towards refugees and which themes they reflect. And in fact, we have done this through looking at the words they use and what kind of theme they reflect. So words like home and asylum they use. This reflects political responsibility. Desperate, traumatized, friendly, poor, different, educated, polite, helpless. This reflects humanitarianism. War and flee, conflict, and home, learn, language, integration. So out of the 7 themes we identified, 4 of these are related to the attitudes of the students or participants towards Syrian refugees. So, like I said, So the expressions featuring in the digital news published in 2015 and 2016 on Syrian refugees are associated with 7 major themes. These are humanitarianism, military conflict, political responsibility, security and restriction, dehumanization, financial burden, and integration. The second conclusion is that the lexical items used or the words used by our participants expressing their attitudes towards Syrian refugees are associated with humanitarianism and compassion and integration. The third conclusion is, we conclude that this indicates that they are well aware of their own opinions and possibly not easily influenced by the media, potentially because of their training in critical reading and critical thinking. So because not everything that was given in the media, they absorbed. So it seemed that they filtered what they read before they expressed their attitudes towards the refugees. Of course, there are limitations on this study because our participants, of course, are not representative. They are not a representative sample of the whole German society. I mean, they are representative of university students who are like educated and being trained in different ways of critical reading, critical thinking. But anyway, I mean, the whole study has important implications. These implications are for incorporating systematic media education in general courses offered by Western and Arab universities, because students have to be aware of that not everything that is presented in the media is actually correct. And nowadays we know that we have a lot of false news and fabricated news. So it's very important for the students to be critical when they read the news, whether online or print news. And of course, the last implication is that to help integrating Arab refugees in Europe in host communities. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stop sharing.
Okay. Every time we switch, we have to make sure that we switch off everything that makes any sound.
Yeah.
It's like there are aliens in the room. Anyway, thank you very much, Zahra. Very interesting. Actually, sort of very accurate research, and I think it should be available for the larger public. This should be very, very inspiring for most of the people. Now, before the break, I leave the floor 1 second to our PhD candidate Gunesh. If you can come, she has an announcement. that for obvious reason I could not do. So please.
Yeah, okay. Just for 10 seconds. If anyone just ordered the book, so we can provide the opportunity that you can give your contact information, address information to me, and we're gonna create a kind of list. Of course, the online guests can also maybe send an email or a message to us, and then we can order book with more like affordable price, maybe cheaper one that you can buy. So if we can offer it as a group, it's more affordable. So that's why I just want to, so you can find me through the break or like digitally, and then we can create this. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Gunesh. So now it's 3:37, and we have time for the break, about 10 to 15 minutes. 10 to 15 minutes break, and see you later. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We leave the connecting me probably, I hope.
And you are also recording.
I'm also recording. That looks like a threat, but yes. So we are back for the second section of this conference today. And now let us see 25. Okay, people are coming back.
I'll put you on mine if you like.
Martin Leiner, I can see you. Back. All right, now you should be able. Oh, Professor Schreider, welcome. أهلا وسهلا يا دكتور.
حياك الله. How are you?
Okay, so we are back, and it's our pleasure to introduce the first speaker of the second session. That is actually the MENA man, the guy who started it all from a financial point of view, and now it's keeping on working on the project, and he's going to explain us how it developed from the beginning. The beginning was the conference we were talking about in 2018. It is Dr. Iyad Al-Dajani, who is currently executive and research director of the Academic Alliance for Reconciliation in the Middle East and Africa, on MENA, and is the coordinator of the Doctoral School for Reconciliation, Conflict Transformation, and Peace Studies at FSU in Jena. He is specialized in research applied phronesis in the development of reconciliation, digital humanities, and peace studies in its innovative transdisciplinary scientific approach. The interesting thing about phronesis, the origin of the word comes from sailmen. And it was the art, the knowledge and art of the sailmen, of the people of the sea, that they were able to interpret how clouds and winds and how the power of the sea would be in the next few hours. So the idea, this art, knowledge and art of navigating into storms. This is the Greek origin of the word that already fascinated me. Please welcome Iyad Al-Dajani.
So thank you so much, and thank you for preparing this launch, Dr. Davide and Dr. Francesco. I think this is a great launch for the book and a start for our work of MENA and the integration of MENA. I thank you all for coming here and really supporting us in developing the Academic Alliance for Reconciliation in the Middle East and North Africa. The one thing I would like remember about this phronesis and digital humanities is that one professor told me 11 years ago when I started studying digital and humanities, he said, what a computer scientist has to do with the humanities. And 11 years, as you see, digitization world is part of what we can do is conflict transformation and to transform from theory into practice. And one of those theory into practice that we are working on is Academic Alliance for Reconciliation in the Middle East and North Africa. And if, I have sharing, so I will share my presentation. As I'm here and I'm not gonna speak more about my research. You can read it in the book. It's launched and published. Thank you all who worked, David and Francesco and Professor Leiner as well. And we would like to use the book, study it, see what you can do. And now I would work more into my practice and see how we apply it from theory into practice into this, world of, academics that we wanted to build. So MENA is like an acronym for the Academic Alliance for Reconciliation in the Middle East and North Africa. And we had many objectives in the MENA. Let me see if I can go in. Yeah, let's see now, we go. So the introduction, I'm not gonna go very fast, I'm gonna like maybe faster than before. It's like we started in 2015, Professor Leiner and myself actually writing for many universities and higher education institutions, to plant the seeds of reconciliation. We thought that it can be done from the lower bottom approach. And this can happen in higher education institutions. Then we had a lot of work and talking to a lot of people, writing proposals, and then we got accepted to do this conference called MENA Academic Alliance for Reconciliation Middle East and North Africa by the German Science Foundation. And then as you've seen, we did this conference and we worked accordingly. So one of the main objectives today of Academic Alliance, or MENA, is to capacity building for higher education institutions in reconciliation, conflict transformation, and peace studies. And we focus first on developing the research skills and capabilities of reconciliation, conflict transformation, and peace studies. And also what we do secondly, we strengthen the network of partnership in the Middle East and North Africa, in the higher education institutions. So we're also networking at the same time, not Middle East and North Africa alone, with Europe. So we're connecting Europe, Middle East, North Africa together. This is the triangle that we are working on. Third, and I would like to talk about, is what we promote as a research. We promote what we call transdisciplinary research approach in a multi-scientific scale. So what does that mean? It means like you can be an economist and apply reconciliation in economy. You can be a political science, apply reconciliation in political science. You can be a social scientist and apply reconciliation in social scientists. You can be a computer scientist like me and apply it in reconciliation science. So this is a multi-scale scientific world of reconciliation. One of the life that we did in MENA, as you see in 2018, we did the inauguration after the conference of the symposium, I call it, not a conference. As you see, symposiums, because we are not writing about the conference itself, we're writing about symposium research done on reconciliation in the MENA region. So it referred about reconciliation with refugees. As you see now, we have published a book and we do the MENA inauguration. In 2019, many members came in and we applied for another research called Conflict Resolution and Reconciliation in the Higher Education Institution in Palestinian universities. We had 5 Palestinian universities. Actually, in March, they came here to Jena, 48 participants, 14 professors, 32 bachelor, master students from Palestine to understand what is reconciliation. And we told them about the history of German reconciliation process in history. This was our workshop, and I think it was very successful. In 2020, we did this Heritage, Reconciliation, and Social Inclusion Conference, and now we're preparing the book. The book publication was for this year, hopefully. And we also worked more in developing the reconciliation, where we developed a new research project. It's called Strengthening the Capacity of Research in the MENA region and Higher Education Institutions, and it was in 2021 that we applied for it. So these are part of our objectives. So thirdly, let's see what is MENA. MENA is Academic Alliance. So we started 22 higher education institutions. We are now about maybe over 60. And we're not saying just MENA region, MENA, Europe, Latin America, US, and you can take a pick. We are working more and more, and also Korea, South Korea. Exactly, as you see. Exactly, we have South Korean here, so we have to. So how do you do from theory to practice? We did a lot of theory, so we go more into the theory, how it's done. So we do an MOU with our universities, then we do a symposium, we have international workshops. We did a workshop in December with 21 professors from the Arab world, in Jordan, Palestine, Algeria. They came here, and we developed a master program. So now we're developing a master program in those higher education institutions that are teaching reconciliation and peace studies. And those master programs will be applied, and then after that, they can come to MENA and continue a PhD. So this is part of our workshop with the staff, the professors. Other workshops that we have teaching programs, we have op seminars, and we have workshop, and we have also a summer school. We're trying to, with our partners, to develop a summer school as well. We develop curriculum in reconciliation and peace studies. These are part of what we are doing. And we do joint projects and research. As I talk to you today, I have exactly 21 higher education institutions in our research projects. And they are working together, all together. And this is a big, we worked with ADAD, we worked with German Science Foundation, and also we are in Erasmus Plus, as they are also, and we have also joint publications. So let's go. As well, as you know, we have our Armenia, and now who's hosting all this? We have to thank them, by the way. It's Friedrich Schiller University, and they are the people who are hosting us as an academic alliance. And they gave us, you know, the armena.uni.jena.de. So you can go there. There's the teams me, Davide, Francesco. I can say also Laura, she's a practical, and also our PhD assistant is Leiner, she's also there, and as well Rawan, who was also assisting us in there. So we have like a big, huge team. Another Professor Burke from International, and we have also fellow researchers from the Arab, about 55 fellow researcher professors from the Arab world that are there. And also we have a scientific board that's headed by Professor Leiner, and all the professors are on that scale. And you can also find them over there in the website. Then last, I would like to talk about what are the research projects that Armenia is doing today. So one of the projects that we won a grant is €1 million from the Erasmus Plus projects, and it's strengthening the academic alliance in the field of higher education in the Middle East and North Africa. So we have 8 universities in this project. Each university has 8 countries, and each country has 2 universities, and each 2 university has 3 professors, and each 3 professors has 2 students. So this will amount for about 42 people in one project. So this is how much is like this is one project of what we are doing. And we are now working together to develop a massive program for each university. And in this massive program, after the master, you get it, you are hooked also to a PhD program, and they are intertwined and connected together. And this is what we are trying to do. And now we have like a PhD program. As you see here, I see one of our 3 or 5 of our PhD students that are really here as well. And they are trying to, you know, apply. And we have another 5 people that applied. We can tell that I have 2 PhD students from Jordan with the supervision of Professor Scheide. He's the Dean of University of Jordan, and they got full scholarship to come to Jena, to Armenia, to do a PhD. And we have also the Doha Institute, who have another full scholarship from the government of Qatar, who's interested to send their students to Armenia to understand reconciliation and peace studies. So this is also, and we are working as well with Trans Research in Dubai. And we have all this network that is really hooked in. And you can know that people don't like each other. We have Lebanon, we have Tunis, Algeria, Jordan, and they are all fighting within each other. They have all their agendas, and it's all moving forward and on. So the other project is what we did with Palestinians, 5 Palestinian universities, and from Gaza. We have the Islamic University of Gaza, and we have the Azhar University of Gaza. People are not liking each other. So, and we have also University of Hebron, and we have also Arab American University that are part of us, and we have many other universities. I can say but Europe as well. We have Granada University in Europe that is really active with us, with the Conflict Resolution Center in Granada with Professor Diego. I think he is really very active with us as well. We have in Latin America as well, have 2 other universities in Colombia, and then we have also in Washington, D.C., the Maria Hoch Institute for Reconciliation Studies, as you see Marissa is from, and Antti, and we are working as well with George Mason University as well to try to develop more into this research academically. And then we go to the Armenia PhD program. I told you that's how we are trying to develop it. We have exactly 30 applications, and we have 21 professors that are into this program. And they are trying to make it more and more appropriate in the academic setting. And it's a scientific. And then we have publication. We signed an agreement with Springer to publish our books, Armenia book series. So this is what we are trying to do. We're trying to develop an Armenia book series, and then it will be each year is different. And then we go into like a symposium that we are trying to do. The symposiums, as we do every 2 years, this year's symposium is about reconciliation, conflict transformation, and peace education. And it's transdisciplinary research. As you see, those all universities are going to take part of it. You're also most welcome to take part of it. And I thank you everyone for listening to us in this. And you're more welcome to be part of it. Lastly, I can say that we are co-funded by the Erasmus Plus projects of the European Union. Thank you, David. Thank you, Francesco, for having us. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayat. Professor Leiner raised his hand, so I guess he has a question for you.
Okay, so maybe I can stop sharing, I think, right? Okay, and Professor Leiner, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. And Professor Schreide as well, and everybody. Not a question. Thank you. I think it was a perfect presentation, how this work grew during the years with the Academic Alliance for Reconciliation Middle East and North Africa. I would like to do something else. We have with us Mana Faraj, who very recently completed her PhD. And it was also about refugees, about Palestinian refugee women and their position towards reconciliation. And normally when you are in Jena, we go out eating together and we are throwing also something around this word of Sahanfried. Unfortunately, we have COVID and other problems. You are in Palestine and you can make it later when you come. But I would like in this group also to congratulate you for this achievement. You made your thesis and also the doctoral exam successfully, and we are all proud and happy about you.
Thank you very much, Professor Leiner. Thank you. And I would like to congratulate you for this achievement of the book. I'm very looking forward to read it, actually, because it's very related to my work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, very much welcome. Now back to Francesco or Davide, who is, Davide is, I think, making the chair now.
So now it's me, the chair is constantly rotating. So I'm very glad now to give a word to my colleague Zina Barakat. So Dr. Zina Barakat received her PhD here in Jena at the Friedrich Schiller University, and she is the executive director and the academic coordinator of the European Graduate School for Peace and Conflict Resolution Studies at Europa University Flensburg in Germany, and the research associate at the von Hügel Institute University of Cambridge in the UK. She's the author of the monography Heart of Stone to Heart of Flesh, Evolutionary Journey from Extremism to Moderation, which was published in 2017. So, dear Zena, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Francesco. Thank you, everyone. First, let me start by congratulating Manar. Congratulations, Manar, and I wish you all success in your life.
Thank you, dear. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel today. I'm very glad to be one of the editors of this book and to be able to present my contribution at this launching, a contribution that I composed with my colleague, Professor Wustenberg. In our book chapter, we explore the term empathy. When people think of empathy, they usually think of the way that one person cares about the welfare of another. The Oxford Dictionary provides a very rough definition according to which empathy implies the ability to imagine and understand the thoughts, perspective, and emotion of another person. This general definition is close to current psychological research defining empathy as the feeling that one understands another person's emotional state. Mark Davis, in his book Empathy, a social psychological approach, suggested that empathy, a more active attempt by one individual to get inside the other, to reach out in some fashion through a deliberate intellectual effort. Its origin, however, lies in the German aesthetics discourse and stems from the word Einfühlung, to be distinguished from the term sympathy that had its earliest roots in the 18th century moral philosophy Ham Smith. However, the concept of empathy is in need to be fully explored, both in current discourses on political reconciliation or post-conflict resolution and interreligious dialogue. We like to highlight in this paper the connection between both fields, looking at the cases of South Africa and Palestine, where politics and religion are intertwined. In this essay, we argue for the urgent necessity for both exploring empathy in the field of reconciliation studies and introducing empathy, or more precisely, empathetic dialogue, to the field of interreligious studies, often closely related to reconciliation studies. In our book contribution, we highlighted 6 aspects of empathetic dialogue, namely, first, empathy has in general to do with discovering the other's perception. The word itself carries the meaning of feeling with its counterpart, Einfühlung. Empathy is realized in living together and genuinely attending to another's perspective over time. It's about compassion, deriving from the Greek paschine. Thus, an empathetic dialogue, I am exposed to the authenticity of the other, religious or political. Second, exploring the political dimension of empathetic dialogue, it is interesting to note what happens at the forum of the South African TRC. Victims and perpetrators were mutually exposed to the authentic way they experienced the traumatic past. The dialogue between victims and perpetrators allowed to empathize. Thus, empathetic dialogue is a precondition for interpersonal reconciliation. The final report of the South African TRC gives evidence for this assumption. In the concluding section on reconciliation, the compilers of the report state reconciliation is based on respect for our common humanity. Third, empathetic dialogue has a personal dimension. From the South African case, we can learn that empathy is not the only precondition for interpersonal reconciliation, but intrapersonal reconciliation. Interpersonal reconciliation is between individuals. Intrapersonal reconciliation is within yourself. It is called intrapersonal reconciliation, the reconciling with one's memories, the coming to terms with the painful past. Thus, our assumption may prove right: no reconciliation without empathetic dialogue within ourselves. Fourth, empathy is the seed for tolerance in the field of religion and politics, and thus it paves the way for rehumanizing both partners in the dialogue. From own endeavors in the field of Muslim-Christian relation, the conclusion is near at hand that basic insights provide the potential for interfaith tolerance. Insights. As such, I am not the master of the other's faith nor my own. Thus, I am tolerant. The more I am Christian, the more I am tolerant of other religions. The more I am Muslim, the more I am tolerant. The more I realize that my faith is God's gift, the more I will accept for the other that his faith is also given. Truth is a gift freely given, not a possession in need for defense. Fifth, a religious stance will contribute to political reconciliation. I engage in empathetic dialogue because I am curious. I engage with the other because I would like to get to know the different perspectives of faith from him or her and to bring them into conversation with my perspective. Curiosity, as I understand it, takes the religious question of truth very seriously. It is God who is absolute and holds for absolute truth claims, not the religion, neither Islam nor Christianity nor Judaism. Six, engaging in empathetic dialogue transcends either religious or political identity. It takes a pluralistic viewpoint. As Palmisano puts it, in a dialogue guided by empathy, we are all losing ourselves in the sense of being given for anew to the process of disassembling the barriers that prevent us from experiencing the converging ways we are already sharing with one another but do not yet fully realize. In sum, empathy encourages the cultivation of habitus for tolerance of ambivalence and challenges an organization of experience through feelings of resentment, anger, or fear. From the South African case, we can learn, as Christe Kruger puts it, that empathy plays a crucial role that was experienced between individuals at the TRC became paradigmatic of intergroup empathy. The proceedings of the TRC seem to have relied on the empathy that was felt between individuals, perpetrators, and victims, and by the audience. The horrors of the human rights violations were shared. As summarized elsewhere, through the participation of the listeners, the suffering of victims is removed, and a new perspective on life and dignity is gained. Insofar as seen above, empathy paves the way for rehumanizing both partners in a dialogue. In conclusion, we like to make this point, whereas in South Africa in 1980s, The assumption was no reconciliation without justice. In 1990s, after the release of Nelson Mandela, the end of apartheid, the demand was no reconciliation without truth. And for the conflict that it is still ongoing, like in Israel-Palestine, we need to add another condition to achieve to the high goal of reconciliation, namely empathy. No reconciliation without empathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zena, for your contribution. I see already there is a question from Davide.
All right, probably. Okay. Thank you very much, Zena. Thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have just one question about a word that you use that, as you know better than me, it's very controversial. The word, the concept of tolerance. You mentioned, as you know, the more you are for your faith, the more you are tolerant toward the others. Would you explain what did you mean there? Because as you know, this word has been used in several ways with different meanings. What did you mean in your paper with the word, with being tolerant with?
From my perspective, to be tolerant, to accept you as you are, David, as a Christian. If I do not respect you, tolerate you as a Christian, then I cannot see you as a human being. So if you accept me, if I accept you, then I can be tolerant and to hear your perspective, to hear about your religion, to hear your background, everything.
Okay, then I think.
Okay, I think it is time for
Yes.
our keynote speaker.
Absolutely.
Is it? So we can do half hour.
Yes.
So it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure.
Please, honored that you are with us. I'm very happy to give you the word.
Thank you, Francesco. Thank you, David. Allow me to start just by congratulating the Jena Center for Reconciliation Studies on this publication, for Martin and your team, for the honor to participate with an essay to this book, for the original invitation to the conference, for the friendship over the years, the participation, and I hope many more productive years to come. Martin, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with you, and I look forward very much indeed to spending some time in Jena. The first thing Martin showed me as I arrived at the train station was my name on a poster, and it was the poster for this keynote address, and I'm so delighted to be participating. I'm already having unusual thoughts being in Jena. I think it must be the fresh air here in Jena. I want to start by saying that I was so struck by something that Dr. Barakat just said now, Zena, about truth. If I correctly quote you, truth is a gift freely given and not a possession of yourself. And so I want to explore the relationship between refugees and reconciliation today a little bit from the other side. Not so much the reconciliation that refugees need, but the reconciliation they offer to us, the hosting societies. The kind of voice that they bring to us, which we ourselves have lost. To see refugees as a resource, rather than just the recipient of our largesse, I think is a very important part of what reconciliation in fact implies. A two-way street between giving and taking from both ends. And so I would like to just explore that a little bit. And so thank you for that very lovely quote, Zena, that captures that, I think. And also, I think, is it Francesco that said earlier that reconciliation of appropriation? Very, very interesting that we must be careful of that. And I could add the assimilation, and that we need to honor that. I've not yet time to read the whole book, I have to say, but of course I've read one chapter, and that's the chapter I wrote back in 2018 after finishing my time in Iraq. I did read the first two chapters, and as I say, those first two chapters by Martin Leiner gives us a very good overview of what is a new area of study. And so I'd like to build a little bit on that. Now, I was in Iraq when Mosul fell, quite literally when it fell down, as the coalition forces bombed their way to victory over the uniquely horrified ISIS. But in the process, also burying thousands of civilians in their own homes when bombs rained down on the old city of Mosul, with little cobblestone streets and historic homes. When one walked the streets of Mosul 1 year later, the bodies were still there. The remains of ISIS fighters scattered in the streets, sometimes cut in half by the bombs, but left as a message. And many, many more innocent families buried under the rubble of their own homes. Rubble, it was estimated at the time, equivalent to roughly 8 million tons, or 3 times the volume of the Great Pyramid in Giza, dumped on this historic old city. And it has taken UNESCO the intervening 3 years since 2018 to remove 5 million of that tons of rubble, so that reconstruction is actually starting now as we meet. So far, 45 homes have been completed and 75 more are to come, as well as work on the famous Al-Nuri Mosque, the iconic mosque once featured on the Iraqi banknotes, where ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared the caliphate in July 2014 as ISIS washed over Iraq. And although UNESCO in particular has done sterling work, and before it the UNDP, to restore some basic infrastructure, building back is almost always slow, it's arduous, and forever incomplete. Almost never does that which is destroyed in anger and violence return to its former glory. Built into the very definition of post-war reconstruction is disappointment, of inefficiency, of permanent loss and permanent cost. A cost the world will once again be counting once the beautiful country of Ukraine begins that process. And what goes for physical reconstruction, most assuredly also goes for social reconstruction and for reconciliation. A core element of which is to learn to live together and accompany not only one another, but also accompany a pain that will never really go away. Palliative care, as John Paul Lederach points out, is the medical profession's term for accompaniment of those for whom there is no cure. And he suggests that this practice of accompanying that which will not go away may have important insights for those of us who promote reconciliation. And yet, the title of my essay back then was, and the title of the talk today is Glimmers of Hope, with a question mark, I should add. I would like to situate that paper in the world of today, 3 years later. It feels that since the book was written and its publication now, the world has aged a lot. Back in 2018, we were grappling with Syrian refugees, but it was before we could come to grips with the historic meaning that Russia had just returned Bashar al-Assad to power. Its first deployment since the Cold War ended beyond the borders of the former Soviet Union. Thereby, I would argue, prolonging Syria's collapse indefinitely. It was before that 2018 was before we had realized the full extent of foreign interference in the US elections, or the alt-right wing American interference in Brexit vote, or of course Brexit itself, dealing a major blow to European reconciliation. It was before Donald Trump had time to discredit the liberal world order or American democracy itself to the extent that he eventually did. It was even before we all witnessed American citizens coming to within a hairbreadth of staging a coup and destroying their own capital. It was before the surge in China's projection of its new military might that had taken on an ominous tone that it has today, whether that be in the South China Seas or near Taiwan, or indeed further afield. Or it was before a new war erupted on European soil, with the potential of a possible nuclear holocaust. It was also, of course, before COVID. And at the time, 2018, I would argue, we were still more optimistic about our chances of curbing global warming. The world has aged a lot. In a way, the last few years remind me of the second half of the second decade in the 20th century, when there was a world war here in Europe, with a quiet and confident optimism in the progress of science and civilization was at once brutally replaced by hopelessness, leading the famous theologian Karl Barth to publish his letter to the Romans in 1918, with the astonishing claim back then that we search in vain for God in history. Apart from, at one point, at the cross on Golgotha. The world lives, says Barth, under divine judgment, has lost its way, and God's grace only touches the world zenk recht van oben on Golgotha. And yet, my title remains Glimmers of Hope. I think I think that glimmers of hope may reflect, even if they reflect of the shards of the glass of a stained glassed window of a bombed site of prayer. And we certainly cannot overcome the harm of our own folly. We as reconciliation promoters of violent conflict, of war and oppression, without some hope. We cannot hope to piece together and reconcile our collective stories into the journey towards justice and peace without hope. So I've painted a very dark picture, but I'm making the case for hope. Hope is essential for reconciliation. We are called to accompany that which will never go away, yes, but we do not do this as the blind leading the blind, nor as naive optimists whose hope has the same quality as that of children waiting behind the curtain to catch Father Christmas in the chimney. Rather, I speak here of the kind of hope that is at once of things unseen, or at least not yet seen, but at the same time based on the ability to catch glimpses of that hope as it shimmers through history. A bit like Martin Luther King, when he observed that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. What would he say, Martin Luther King, of today's United States? Has his hope realized of the two little children on the hills of Alabama? Surely not. But at the same time, would he have lost his hope? Almost certainly not. The closest I can come to describe this concept of glimpses of hope is perhaps the metaphor of, and forgive the imperfection of this, of a salmon-filled mountain stream. Imagine this. You can look at a river cutting through a mountain, and all you see is the icy steel gray of the surface of the water carving. Let me see, where's my page? Carving a path through a forested gorge. And then something shimmers and glimmers below the surface. And suddenly one realizes that there's something below the surface. There is depth. All is not surface play. Below are movements so fast, so unexpected, that they're impossible to trace or predict. But every now and then, there is something very real and something very beautiful that flashes by. And if we stay there long enough, we come to realize that in all this movement, there is actually direction upstream. For those with eyes to see, there is hope in history, but not the kind of hope that we can own, either conceptually, programmatically, or politically. As we accompany that which cannot be solved, we know that history has depth, that there are realities below and behind the surface play of power and privilege, and that these subtle forces somehow is taking history in the direction of justice. But where do we find these glimpses of hope? Well, perhaps it's not a question of where, but a question of how we have to look. And here again, I would like to revert to a theological metaphor, and one that takes to the heart of the theme of this important book, that explores the links between refugees and reconciliation. This was compellingly developed by Emmanuel Levinas, and I'm glad to hear that Francesco is in conversation with him, who in turn was in conversation with, amongst others, Jacques Derrida and Karl Barth, both the earlier and the later, more moderate part. And that is the metaphor of encountering the other, capital O, within the gaze of the other, small o. And this dates back to the ancient belief of hospitality to the destitute at your city gates. That was a holy obligation, because as once happened to Abraham, sometimes it's the Holy One himself that may be visiting you in the guise of a stranger. And your failure to potentially host the stranger at your city gate may thus not only become a snub to the divine, but may deprive you of the blessing this stranger would have given you. In Abram's case, no less than the promise of a son, despite his advanced age, and that of his wife, giggling in the background when she heard this preposterous offer. And with that, Abram's own role in history. So sometimes it's the refugee that reminds you of who you are and what your role is. And it's the refugee, the destitute, someone turning up at your doorstep that bring God's blessing. I think one of the most worrying features of our world today, largely mediated through sound bites and tweets, is that the very concept of otherness has been diluted so much to a kind of self-managed, self-chosen, even entertaining diversity, which we can muster and conjure up at the tips of our fingers. And that's there to excite us and to entertain us. But then we can exit this immediately when we want to, by a tap of a button. This is not this kind of diversity, is not what's meant by otherness here, which is a far more disruptive, unmanaged otherness. And the kind of otherness brought about by the stranger on your doorstep, rather than a TikTok video or a Facebook post. It is indeed this disruptive other that teaches us how to look, to see hope in history. And that is the blessing, they bring with them. It is indeed in reaching out to those who wash up on our shores, destitute and fragile, dislocated, sometimes even without a story to tell or an identity to present. For physical dislocation, of course, as has been noted earlier, very often results in psychological dislocation. As has been the case for Abram, stuck in the desert under a tree, looking at two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, where the world has lost its way and life gave way to an amoral abandon and hedonism. But receiving the other in can give you a new way into the future, a new future in your home and in your political life. As Martin Leiner points out in the introduction, this burden, but also this blessing, rests disproportionately on the developing world, where no less than 84%, also as I think Davide, you mentioned, of the world's refugees are seeking refuge. By the way, I don't see in the statistics the 2.5 million Zimbabweans that are in South Africa, for example. So I'm wondering whether economic migrants are included in this picture or not. And these are people that have fled Zimbabwe because of hunger and lack of livelihoods. Yesterday morning, I was privileged to listen to the brave pioneers of a new society yet to come in the Rakhine state of Myanmar, the site of the violence, the horrific violence in 2017 that drove 700,000 Rohingya Muslims into neighboring Bangladesh. I've been working since 2018 with a team of local Muslim, Buddhist, and other minority groupings in this context to improve relationships. In a meeting yesterday with 90 of our 500 volunteers, I heard how Rohingya and Rakhine's are now joining hands to visit IDP camps in their communities, some displaced by anti-Muslim violence and others by subsequent civil wars. And here, these community leaders who themselves have hardly got enough to live off, they listen to the needs of the people on their doorstep and try their best to help the people. And these are Muslims and Buddhist people joining hands to help the IDPs. In fact, I was then, when I told them where I was in Jena, a Hindu leader from a community that itself had suffered a massacre 3 years ago, offered his sympathies to the people of Ukraine and expressed his sincere wish to come and assist. If only, he said, our government would let us travel. Never straightforward, never clear-cut, always unfinished, always unpredictable and uncomfortable. Hope is generated in the gaze of those we take in as refugees from war and unbearable conditions in their own countries. Hope without which reconciliation is not possible. Learning to see the world through their eyes and accompanying them on their journey to some form of broken but real peace is not only to encounter hope in a hopeless world, but is in fact to generate that very hope. Thank you.
I already see the speaker. Okay, I already see raised hand. Iyad, please.
Thank you, Professor, for this enlightenment about hope and the terms of hope. I think there's a very important thing that you have discussed is the disruptive other. We all in conflict see myself, I see my suffering, and I see my own agenda of how I will live my own future. So I take this word disrupting the disruptive other. How can you see the disruptive other over the eyes of a victim and a perpetrator? Because the disruptive other is the key to connect both together. You know, like if I see my enemy as a disruptive other, what happened to him, the conflict or transformation, or how can I transform and connect with him? So I think the word disruptive other, how can you connect it to reconciliation and in the eyes of both victims and perpetrators? I think this is one of what I would take very dearly from your lecture here.
Yeah, it's a very important and complex question, and my answer will not do justice to the question offhand. It's something I would, and we will all have to think about more going forward. How does this disruptive discourse serve reconciliation? Well, my suggestion is that, first of all, it generates a kind of hope. It generates a hope in that it breaks open for us the depth that we can see beyond our normal lives, that we see something beyond the established lives in which we live, that is in a sense become our cage through which we cannot break. And so the disruption of the conversation with the genuinely other person, as I look to my Korean colleagues here, and I'm thinking of your road ahead on that peninsula, it is that conversation of two unimaginably different worlds that's got to somehow begin that disruptive conversation that will create something new, which is this reconciliation. Now, one of the things we wrestled with in the South African context was when the TRC was there and we had to interview the perpetrators, was that on the one hand, one has to want to make a historic statement about the evil of apartheid and the evil committed. And that must be unambiguous. You cannot soft-serve evil. And I heard my dear sister from Ukraine speaking earlier. And I just want to also thank you for your amazing contribution. And you touched hugely in my heart what you said, and your sincerity and your passion by saying that these are evil deeds. And I agree, they are evil deeds and it needs to be said. I will say at the same time that there's a second obligation, and that is that the victim has a double burden. The victim has a double burden in that the victim not only have to accept that they have to carry the weight and the burden of past loss and harm, but they have to do so in a way that sets the tone for a better world. And that means it's totally unfair on a victim. But that's the reality of reconciliation. That you need to, that a victim has to both accept the harm done to them, and in the way they do so, they need to reflect a better world. That means a step up from where they were. So revenge does not bring a better world. And so there's no fairness in this, but it is the reality of reconciliation. That unless the victim, and that is the victims of my country, where I was the beneficiary of an unjust system. The Black South Africans had to make a decision whether it's going to be revenge against the white minority, or whether there will be a reconciliation based on our very real political and economic interdependence, but in a way that takes the higher road. And that will in the end be to everybody's benefit. Human nature is unfortunately not yet quite evolved, that this comes naturally to any of us. And the unique thing about the South African, not unique, but the inspiring thing was that the Black leadership decided to take the higher road, which was the one of saying, not necessarily forgiveness, but not revenge. And so the disruptive other disrupts my world only if I listen truly to that other and the other voice. And that means avoiding assimilation. That means avoiding appropriation. It means listening. And one can have another whole day on what it means to listen. We can talk with each other and a lot about what it means to listen in a way that doesn't bring the other into your world and make it harmless to listen to them. And that includes perpetrators. And so there was this French person who said, I've forgotten who that is now, that to know all is to forgive all. So if you listen too long to a perpetrator, then the horror doesn't seem so horrible anymore. This was the banality of evil, Hannah Arendt. But you have to do both. You have to declare the evil in honor of the victim, a historic statement, and you have to listen to the perpetrator. And that's attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I have also a question. So actually, for me, the figure of hope you are proposing us is very important. I think also in philosophical terms. So when we think about hope, we think about something that is related with positive expectations towards the other. So hope is about positive expectations, and it is a form of openness. And this openness is obviously so difficult. It's about relationships that have also traumatic elements in between. But I think that focusing on hope and reconciliation teaches us how our reconciliation is also about openness. And openness, it means also vulnerability. So in the moment that I'm open toward the other, and this other is not a generic one, it is a former perpetrator, I also expose myself in my constitutive vulnerability. I have positive I dare to have positive expectations in spite of negative episodes before. Therefore, there is something heroic, I would say, in hope. So hope is hope in spite of everything. And for me, therefore, it's very inspiring also to think about hope and reconciliation together with, let's say, its first cousin, that is trust. So actually, when I think about hope, I cannot think about hope without thinking about trust. For me, are like two faces of the same coin. Maybe I'm thinking also in theological ways where hope, trust, and love are even characterized as the main virtues that a human being can have. I was always fascinated by this statement, by this Christian theological statement that says hope, trust, and love as main virtues, because these three main virtues are somehow also the three main virtues of reconciliation. And they are all the three radical forms of openness and radical forms of hospitality in the end. So,
yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francesco.
Now I have another question or reflection, but I did the thought.
There is a...
So, Abdelghani, please, if you can.
Yes. Then we need to maybe to
Okay, you can. Okay, thank you so much, Professor, and thank you so much for the presenters and the chairs. I think this book is the outcome of hope itself, because if you don't if you didn't have hope before, you wouldn't have such a book. I'd like to ask you a question, a little question concerning my future studies. Okay, neuro-linguistics programming. I noticed that in your book, which we studied before, last two semesters before, I think you used also the visualized image of the boat concerning interdependency. Okay. Also, now today you use another example of water, and I'd like to ask you a question. You have many examples, and you use in your writings, right? All of them are related to water and sea, or do you have other examples? This is for my own academic studies, because I try sometimes to relate characters or types of people, like visual people and so on. Thank you so much.
No, Abdelghani, all my examples are not related to water, but it is a very interesting observation. This one happens to be because I think there's movement, and there is dimensions which are not obvious to see from the outside. But I think reconciliation is best described in metaphors, because it's very difficult to catch reconciliation in programs. Reconciliation is a dynamic process. It's something that lives in people's hearts. It's based on a hope. It's based on courage. It's based, as Francesco said, on little bits of increments of trust, not complete trust, but sufficient trust just to take the next step. Incidentally, I asked one of the closest advisors to Nelson Mandela once, how did you guys build up the trust between yourselves and the National Party government? And he said, well, my brother, we made good agreements and we kept those agreements. And so it's little increments of trust on little next steps that build up that trust. You don't start with complete trust. You start little. So there are many metaphors. I'll refer you to the writing also of Jean-Paul Leiner with his book, When Blood and Stones and what is it? When Blood and Stones Cry Out, I think it's called, or Blood and Bones Cry Out. It's full of stories like that and anecdotes and things. For example, he says he thinks that reconciliation is a bit like planting a seed, the image of a seed growing. You know, it's not so much a line like this, a linear line. And it's also not this famous picture of a circle going up, because that's also just a line that's crooked, but it's still a line. He says it's more like a seed that evolves. He's developed another metaphor of a spider's web, where you have all these contact points on different parts of the leaf. And, you know, and all these points have to work together to keep this very flexible structure in place. It's not a rigid structure. And so every metaphor is incomplete, but it gives you a little bit of a new form of truth. So I think you're absolutely right in saying that this is important. And in fact, I would like to change. I would like to redirect the challenge at yourself and say, well, you should develop those metaphors as well. We should all be developing these metaphors together, because there's no right and wrong. You know, there are many other metaphors, I think, that are speaking to particular contexts of the world. And I think the Middle East, speaking of MENA, also have their own set of metaphors for reconciliation, which I think should enrich ourselves and everybody else around the world.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
I think I have a very last, I don't know if it's the last one, but I don't want to be the full stop man, but just a reflection that about hope, that is a concept that always fascinated me. And thank you very much. It was very clear, very clear presentation. I was reading a book a few months ago. It was called The Stairway of Mediocrity. Okay, so it was basically the idea. It's in Italian. In Italian, it was a translation. I don't know if in English don't just like this. Anyway, this guy, she was a French sociologist who actually was theorizing the future of a nation, taking the metaphor of a company. Okay, the boss of the company, not a good one, but let's say somebody was put there because he was a relative of someone, not somebody that actually deserves his position. You say he was not choosing as his vice chair somebody more intelligent than him, but somebody more stupid than him. Okay, and then he took over, and the other one was choosing or picking or selecting another more stupid. And so there's no hope. There is hope. At some point, there will be somebody that is so stupid himself that he is going to hire somebody more intelligent than him without realizing that. So I think this is, I'm sorry, but the idea was, my question and reflection is that, so hope is something that I have always conceived as something active you need to look for. But isn't it, so might not be, I was thinking of from Balthasar and the idea of dialogue as an active thing. And so is it possible that even in the worst of the situations, hope is a need without which you cannot bear the situation in which you are. And so from this spark, this is a need that it's something that is active, but at the same time it is passive. I'm forced to have hope that from this spark, something may go not through the hiring of someone more intelligent, but something that comes from the bottom. What do you think?
Yes, I think that's an astute observation. I think that I think there is. It's not always just down to the moral courage of people. It's also down to the realities in which they find themselves. So That's true at the psychological level. It's true at a political level, economic level. If we open our eyes to the situations we really are in, and we combine that with our moral obligations, then I think you have real change. But just to do it out of the pure normative perspective, I think people just aren't strong enough for that. But also at the other end, you become quickly cynical if you lose the normative. So you have to have both. So I think your idea that that hope is a psychological need, it's a psychological need, but at the same time it's a normative commitment. Those two dovetail, I think, is very compelling. I think it is true. And the converse of that is if people live without hope, then you see pathologies. You see psychological pathologies developing, and you see societies without hope. And I would like to link that, actually, this hopelessness also to the loss of otherness in our world through the shallowing, the dilution of it through a superficial diversity, rather than proper engagement with the other. And somehow I haven't. It's not clear in my mind exactly what the links are, but I think there's a link between that and the loss of hope in our world, because we've stopped listening to each other in a real way that respects the other as other, really as other. And so, but we need that hope. And finally, just this, I think that reconciliation, we often say it's about acknowledging the past and then creating a future. I think it's the other way around. I think it's about opening a window on the future and then seeing that the past is in your way and then dealing with the past. But you're dealing with the past because you're moving forward. You're not standing back and looking with the past first, finish it up, and then you turn to the future. You might never turn around. You wrap yourself up in the past. You never get forward. It's opening the window on the future. That fresh breath of hope, that then says, oh, but there's an obstacle in our way. The obstacle is the past. And then to overcome that in order to move forward. I think that is, I wouldn't say that's the only way, but certainly in South Africa, that is the way we did it. We opened the window on the future by our constitutional negotiations, and only when the country was then moving forward decisively did we turn to the past in the form of the Truth Commission. We did not first have a Truth Commission and then have the constitutional negotiations. We had the constitutional negotiations in order to be secure enough and to know where we actually headed. And then we dealt with our past. So the past is dealt for the sake of the future. The future is not developed for the sake of the past. We have to get that priority right. And I think hope is in there somewhere. Enough. Thank you.
Thank you. It is an
Excellent. And yes, I agree. That we're adding. Let's say a big thank you to the people in the room and that attended the conference at the end. And of course, the people connected from everywhere in the world. And otherwise, we will have to do it. Where is that? Martin, live? Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, Martin. Sorry, Martin. We didn't want to.
Not to take your time, just to say thank you that we arrived to end on the end to talk about hope. And this was great, and I thank everybody that we talked about it. It reminds me when being in a meeting with Desmond Tutu, he was asked whether he is an optimist, and he said, "No, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope." And I think somehow everybody is a prisoner of hope, and this keeps us living, and it's so good that we are. So thank you very much from my side here from Prague. And I give back to the Jena folks to say also goodbye.
Okay.
Silence.
Silence is approved.
Golden.
Approval. It won't be so, yeah, you're right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.